Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be looking at existence, or the question if existence or being is a predicate. And we're going to look at Immanuel Kant's answer, since I think this would be fascinating for you guys to look at, since we've already covered Descartes' series. But this is really an objection to Descartes, or St. Anselm's ontological argument for the existence of God. Now I am kind of sick for some reason, so I apologize on part of my voice sounds weird. But oh shoot, I already moved to the next slide. But so, what is existence or being even mean, right? Now I got most of my info from one of Kant's works, which is called the only possible argument in support of a demonstration of the existence of God, in this work Kant provides a priori argument for the existence of God, and he does it based off the notion that possibility or contingency presupposes necessity, or you know. And so in this work, basically Kant doesn't really define being or existence in the first stages or the preliminary text, because existence is actually a very hard thing to define, and sometimes it excuse me, sorry, and sometimes it leads us into circular definitions. But I'm going to be giving you the basic definition for it. Existence is simply the act or actuality that makes something is or real, but it doesn't tell us what the thing is. So what does that mean? So I could know what a unicorn is, but I could be ignorant as to whether it exists. So there's a distinction between essence and existence, right? Existence only tells me that the thing is. It doesn't tell me what that thing is, right? Now, what does it mean when we ask, is existence a predicate? Well, first of all, a predicate is something connected to a noun or subject through the copula or verb is. For example, the tree is green, where the predicate green is connected to the noun or subject tree by the verb to be, because that's the logical copula. It's just is, right? It connects the noun and the subject. It connects the noun and the verb together. Now, uh, if you have watched my prior series, you know that in every proposition, a predicate is going to signify one of the five predicables, either a genus, a species, a difference, an accident, or a property. Now, notably, we've established that existence is not a genus, right? Because has the a genus is the term of a genus is univocal, but being is not univocal for periphery. Although that can be contended by people like Scotus, into which we will get into later, because that is a subject of a more complicated debate with Scotism and Thomism. So, is existence a predicate? Well, Kant says, hell no. Existence is not a predicate, right? Why? Well, because first of all, he says a predicate signifies a attribute or quality that to which something can lack or possess. And we're gonna see why Kant doesn't think existence is a predicate through this example of Julius Caesar. You could list all the possible properties, or qualities. Sorry, properties is a logical term which I should not be using like that, but one could list all the predicates that include space and time, the accidents of Julius Caesar, or the properties, and he could either exist with them or not exist at all. So I could list all the examples, right? So I could say, well, Julius Caesar was from Rome, blah blah blah. He was a man, right? But the thing is, all those predicates or properties or qualities, he could exist with them or not exist at all, right? And so a supreme being, knowing all Caesar's predicates, could still regard him as merely possible, but not existing without a decision to make him, right? So Kant says that millions of merely possible things not actually existing contain all predicates they would have if they existed, and the supreme being cognizes them completely. But existence is not among these predicates, because if they existed, they would not contain a, extra predicate. So, Kant says, although existence is not a real predicate, right, because it doesn't add anything to a concept, it's still going to be used as one, right, because we use it every day. But Kant says this is fine, just as long as you don't try to derive existence from merely possible concepts to prove absolutely necessary existence. Alright, let's move on. So, how is existence used as a predicate? Well, in common speech, existence as a predicate is not used to relate to the thing itself, but rather to the thought one has of the thing. So Kant gives us the example of what this even means. He says, existence belongs to the sea unicorn or narwhal, but not to the land unicorn. This simply means the representation of a sea unicorn or narwhal is an empirical concept. In other words, it is the representation of an existent thing. So anybody doesn't have to examine the concept or notes. Notes, by the way, is just referring to the matter of the concept, really, or like the parts that make it up, of the subject itself, because this alone, or notes can also mean specific qualities as well. But anybody doesn't have to examine this stuff because this alone only contains possible predicates to demonstrate its existence. Rather, anybody can just look at the source of cognition, like whether if you've seen it or you've heard about it. Okay? And by possible predicates, Kant really just means, like, for example, if we conceive of, let's say, a unicorn. A unicorn has a horn. It may have wings. Maybe it's a Pegasus unicorn or whatever. But these are all possible predicates. And you can't demonstrate necessary existence from those possible predicates, right? It's two realms. One is merely in thought, and one is in actuality or reality. And so Kant says existence is the absolute positing of a thing. So what does this mean? Well, we need to note that existence is also distinguished from any predicate because existence is simply the unconditional being of a thing. It is therefore different from any predicate at all, because since a predicate is always stated only in relation to something else. But also that we could also note that existence is really a transcendent thing because it's found in all things, right? Even accidents. And so Kant says that the concept of positing or setting is perfectly simple and identical with being in general. Although something can be thought as posited relatively like a relation or a property of something. But being in this scenario is just the copula in a judgment. That is the is. Like for example, when I say this tree is green, that's the copula. And it expresses a logical relation. But if a thing is posited in itself, not just as a relation, then that being means existence. So just to recap, when something is positive relatively, it more has like relative existence. Like for example, accidents have relative existence because they always inhere in a subject or a substance, right? But a predicate is always stated in relation to something else because what is it a predicate of, right? It has to have a subject or a substance, right, as its subject. And so Kant gives us the 100 thalers or coins example. And thalers is just basically Prussian dollars. And so Kant gives us the example: 100 possible dollars versus 100 real dollars. The point is that both $100 have the same predicates, right, or same properties, same attributes, whatever, qualities, etc. The only difference is that the real $100 exists outside my thought, right? But thus, it is shown that existence does not change the matter or content of a concept. It only changes whether that concept has a referent or it picks out a specific thing in reality, right? So, if you watch my video on Kahedin's response to Anselmium critics about the proof of the existence of God, whether existence is a perfection and that a thing existing would be greater than a thing not existing. Well, Kant says No, existence does not add anything. All existence is saying that is all existence is stating is that that term or that concept has a referent or is picking something out in reality. There's something in reality that represents that, right? And so really we get to the critique of Descartes. And so Kant asserts that some ideas are almost impossible to analyze clearly. And existence is one of them. That is because existence is one of the most simple concepts that you can't really break down. Because both the object and our way of understanding it are so basic and too simple. And this is what Kant means by, it's so impossible, it's almost impossible to even analyze these clearly. Now, a famous French philosopher who we know to be Mr. René Descartes tried to prove the existence of God through his ontological argument that goes like this. First, I have an idea of a supremely perfect being, that is, a being that having all perfections. Premise 2, necessary existence is a perfection, and therefore a supremely perfect being exists. And so really, if you notice the nature of Descartes' argument, he presupposes or assumes that existence can be used as a predicate or a type of perfection or quality, something that can be added to a concept. Now, Kant says the question as to whether God exists or does not exist, is to say that whether God is posited absolutely, right? Because existence is, for Kant, is the absolute positing of a thing. But this is not contained in the original assertion, which is, God is omnipotent or God is a perfect all-knowing being, right? And is in a sentence doesn't always mean existence for Kant. It can just mark a logical relationship, like as, the copula in any judgment. Or a proposition, that is to say. And it can even represent a logical relationship, even about imaginary things, like a unicorn or contradictory things. Like, a square is a circle. Now, the proposition that God is omnipotent or is an all-perfect knowing being is true for even an atheist if they understand the concept, although you can, mark the intention of, first intention versus second intention in logic. Now, God's existence isn't just another property or predicate, right? It is built into the very way his concept is posited. And existence isn't something you can attach to a thing as an extra quality, especially not to God. And so Kant says that if the subject's existence is not presupposed, then every predicate is rendered indeterminate concerning if it really belongs to an existent or mere possible subject. So existence is not a predicate itself. So really what that means is that a subject, right, if I say an apple, a black apple, right, let's say I have a black apple. If I don't presuppose the existence of this thing, then every attribute or every attribute or quality of it is merely just possible. It's indeterminate, meaning there's no fixed actuality, right? It's possible that maybe this apple has X, Y, Z, blah, 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 right? So this shows that existence cannot be a predicate itself. And so Kant says that saying God is an existent thing is actually misleading, because a more accurate way to put it is that something that exists is God. And so the predicates are posited relatively to the subject, but the thing itself, that is, with all the predicates, is posited absolutely. So this really basically goes back to the categories of Aristotle, right? Because the predicates or the accidents, right? This is so fundamental because the subject or the substance can never be predicated of something. And so the predicates or accidents are positive relatively. That means they exist relatively to the subject because their existence depends on the subject. So for example, the accident white man. White only exists because of the subject man, right? Or the substance. But the thing itself or the subject, that is man, that contains all these predicates or accidents, it is said that he has primary existence or is posited absolutely. And so the thing to realize here is that a real actual existing thing does not have more properties or predicates than a merely possible being, as shown by the 100 Thalers example. Because all the properties of a real existing thing already exist in its possibility itself. All the predicates, all the properties of Julius Caesar that you actually existed already existed in his possible existence even in the first place. But if you're talking about how a thing is posited, as Kant is going to explain, then actual existence does add something, which is the thing itself being absolutely posited and not just relatively. But then this again, it does not affect the matter or what is the content of a concept. And so nothing more is posited in an existent thing than in a merely possible one. Speaking of predicates, by the way, in terms of properties, attributes. But more is posited through a real existing thing than through a merely possible thing, because a real existent thing involves the absolute positing of the thing itself, meaning that there is something in reality to which it picks out. There is a referent in reality to which it corresponds to. But if we're just talking about in mere logical possibility, only relations of something to something are posited according to the law of contradiction, and not the thing itself. And so thus Descartes' argument actually fails to prove the existence of God according to Descartes, and rather the only thing Descartes actually proved was what God would be like if he exists. So thus for Kant, existence must be demonstrated or proved through a middle term. And by a middle term, I simply just mean, in terms of the syllogism or the structure of the syllogism, a explanation or the cause for that basis, right? And so we need reasons for believing in the existence of X, and not simply a description of what X might be like if it exists. Alright, so let's recap to why Kant rejects existence as a predicate. Well, first of all, existence doesn't add anything to a concept of a thing. It just says whether a thing is in reality. Second of all, existence is not an analytic predicate nor a synthetic predicate. And so for Kant, an analytic judgment is one in which the predicate is already contained in the subject, and a synthetic predicate is one where a predicate adds something or extends something to a subject but is not contained in that subject. And so for Kant, existence is not an analytic nor a synthetic predicate, because analytic judgments, as I have said, the predicates are contained in the subject, and this would mean if you were to deny them, there would be a contradiction. And if existence was analytic, then denying it would be a contradiction, but it's not, right? I can deny the existence of God without contradiction, therefore it's not analytic at all. And so existence isn't a synthetic predicate also, because a synthetic predicate adds something new to a subject and extends it. For example, a green apple. Green merely merely extends it. It's a feature, right? Existence doesn't change or extend an object. It merely posits it. Thus, existence is a logical copula or connection saying that there is an object corresponding to the concept somewhere in reality. And later we're going to talk about Kant's analytic synthetic distinction and his, I believe it was called the something about the, my apologies, it's called Kant's synthetic a priori. And this is going to be judgments like 1 + 1 = 2. And additionally, if existence was a predicate, it then seems that we are unable to avoid some contradictory statements like, some things do not exist. But if existence is assumed to be a predicate, that is something that adds something to a concept, then it means that there are things that are not, which is a contradiction. So, another argument I tend to hear is that existence cannot be a predicate because a predicate signifies one of the 5 predicaments: a genus, a species, an accident, a property, or a difference. Existence cannot be in any of these because existence transcends those. First of all, existence is not a genus, as Porphyry established, because existence is more of like a transcendental. It's in all things. And by transcendental, it just means certain type of things that that are in all things, basically. Like goodness, beauty is a transcendental for Thomas Aquinas. So thanks for watching.